From a chocolate king to a neo-Nazi frontman, Ukraine's top job, hopefuls and their campaigns in Kiev. That's as army shelling and deadly clashes resume in the country's restive east. Looking east, Russia refocuses its business priorities to Asia. We bring you all the latest from the final day of the annual Economic Forum in St. Petersburg. And people around the world rise against a genetically modified food as activists join forces against the biotech giant Monsanto. We report why they're up in arms. It's midday here in the Russian capital. You're live with us on RT International. You're with me, Tabang Mutse. Ukraine's observing a so-called day of silence when political campaigning ends before Sunday's presidential election. But there's been no reprieve for the newly proclaimed Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics in the country's east. They are defying the new authorities in Kiev as unconstitutional, accusing them of usurping power during a violent coup last winter. Kiev launched a military operation to bring the rest of regions back under their control over a month ago. This is the latest footage coming from the Donetsk area showing the aftermath of fighting. 5 people were killed when local anti-government forces reportedly clashed with a paramilitary squad formed by the radical right sector group, which makes up a part of Kiev's forces. The casualties came on both sides. The right sector rose to prominence during the February coup in Kiev when it helped overthrow the previous Ukrainian government. It's known for its far-right ideology and for intimidating its opponents. Its leader, Dmitry Yarosh, recently hit out at the interim authorities in Kiev, accusing them of betrayal, citing the rising death toll among his members. Yarosh is also running on Sunday's presidential election. And for more on the lineup in the race, here's Paula Slier with more.
This is just the beginning. Ukraine's resurrection, Europe's resurrection, they start at our Maidan.
Dmitry Yarosh leads the ultra-nationalist Right Sector Party. Wary of the European Union, he wants to lower taxes on small businesses and break up conglomerates owned by Ukraine's super-rich. Back in February, his supporters were the main fighting force in the blood-stained Western-supported coup. And now he's one of the main backers of the military crackdown in the east.
We have to squish all those behind the terrorist efforts there.
May I just ask what that word you've used, squish, means?
To physically eliminate them.
Oleg Tyagnybok is chairman of the right-wing Svoboda party and thinks Ukraine should give up on Russian gas and charge Moscow more for gas transits. He's called for the Russian language to be banned and believes minority rights should be limited. He's also charged with being anti-Semitic. Yulia Tymoshenko was the heroine of the 2005 Orange Revolution, known as much for her hair plait as for her politics. The 2 times ex-prime minister was jailed in 2011 for exceeding her powers. Her campaign is built on the alleged abuse she suffered in detention. She promises accession to the European Union, even if it means severing ties with Moscow. But it's unclear if voter trust is there. Her political steps range from friendly gas deals with President Putin on the one hand to calling for Russians to be nuked on the other. Petro Poroshenko, dubbed the Chocolate King for building his wealth on sweet deals, selling his candy both in Ukraine and across the border in Russia. A predicted frontrunner, he is a champion of European integration and seen by many as the best person to reform the country's failing economy. But he's viewed as an unreliable partner. Critics complain that his political flexibility is too slippery and that Ukraine does not need another oligarch at the helm. Running Ukraine is arguably one of the toughest jobs in the world today. Even if Petro Poroshenko emerges the clear winner come Sunday, he has his work cut out for him. First order of business is deciding how to deal with the regions in the east who have denounced the legitimacy of these elections. Then he must address the country's looming economic crisis. And lastly, there's the sensitive question of what to do with these encampments here at Maidan, the heart of the anti-government protest that lay the groundwork in the first place for these elections. Pauluslia RT, Kiev, Ukraine.
Dr. Theodore Karasik from a Dubai-based security and strategy consultancy says Sunday's polls won't be a game changer for Ukraine.
It's clear that the elections are only part of a process, but I think in the long term we're looking at a Ukraine that looks like a Syria in the sense that you have a lot of the same phenomena occurring in Syria as you do in Ukraine. The differences, of course, are the actors in terms of non-state actors and state actors and who's backing them. The situation in Ukraine is complicated on multiple levels. It's not just about East versus West. It's more about a multidimensional chessboard of issues within Ukraine by region, by city, and also in terms of the situation regarding the fascist question. And unfortunately, the West, and particularly the United States, does not understand Ukraine's history and fails also to understand Russia's position on Ukraine itself today. I think the Obama administration is making a tremendous mistake in supporting these groups in Kiev who have fascist tendencies.
We'll be bringing you all the latest from Ukraine throughout the weekend on air and online at RT.com. It's the final day of the annual International Economic Forum in St. Petersburg. Delegations from around the world and hundreds of business leaders have talked shop at Russia's Davos. Big names in energy, finance, banking and construction are present. As Russia strengthens its economic ties with China, delegates at the forum agreed that it's time to stop talking politics and get down to business. RT's Katie Pilgrim explores the Asian shift.
This forum comes the same week that we have the $400 billion gas deal with Gazprom sealed with China, and there was an air of excitement as to what the potential for Asian business holds for Russia. But as far as Russia is concerned, they have an abundance of natural resources and Asia have the demand, and that's why a lot of people were getting very optimistic about the future relationship between Russia and China.
I heard about 20 or 57 Chinese high-tech companies are ready just to move in and replace Alstom, Siemens, BASF, Bayer, just to name a few. I mean, it's amazing.
We're always next to our clients. So we start exploring new markets and we started exploring new possibilities following our clients. So we've been in the Middle East for a few years by now. We've been moving to China a few years by now.
So as we know, the pivot to Asia is certainly in full swing. The Russian President Vladimir Putin made that adamantly clear here today. We also had the Vice President of China talking about the potential for the two countries. But as far as Europe is concerned, well, there is some concerns that their business relationship will be put on the sideline because of this new flourishing relationship with China. But Mr. Putin made it clear that the door to Europe remains firmly open, and that was a welcomed sentiment by the European business leaders here.
For those who don't want to participate, I think that'll create opportunities for the companies who do want to be here. So if companies leave now, I think it'll be very hard for them to re-establish themselves at some point in the future. And for the ones that do stay, the clear message is that they're in the box seat. They have the most opportunities long term.
We have everything to lose in terms of economy, growth and business. The United States have nothing to lose. That's why they push for these economic sanctions. I am completely against these sanctions because, we are cutting the trees on which we are sitting. And it's completely idiot and inefficient.
It's very crowded. So, and we are here. There is no issue for us.
So you haven't noticed the economic sanctions having any bearing on the forum?
Well, it's not visible at least.
So the forum continues here in St. Petersburg, and as we know, the main message has been the Asia door is widely open, but the European one remains the same.
On the way, seeking refuge from austerity, unemployed young Greeks look to the countryside for better opportunities. We find out if the grass is really greener on the other side. Plus, the UK could run out of fossil fuels in just 5 years' time, according to a recent study. All the details in just a few minutes. If the thought of genetically modified food leaves a nasty taste in your mouth, today's your day to speak out. On Saturday, activists in over 50 nations plan to rally against GM foods and its main producer, Monsanto. Let's see why there's such outrage. Studies suggest GM foods may cause a whole range of toxic effects. These, in turn, may take years to make themselves apparent as an illness. So-called BT corn, now widely used in American agriculture, has been found to contain toxins that have been detected in pregnant women and their unborn babies, and that shows itself in immune system diseases, allergies, even childhood learning disorders. Despite that, the U.S. government is sticking with the GM crops and Monsanto. One organic foods campaigner told us that there are more myths than facts out there regarding GMOs.
It's what the scientists have warned us about, that genetically modified foods will increase allergies, that they're going to be less nutritious, and that they could possibly or very likely contain toxins that can make us ill. So the idea that we actually need GMOs to feed the world is completely false. We actually have enough grassland in the United States to pasture and raise 100% grass-fed beef and produce even more grass-fed beef than we're producing the CAFO-raised, factory-farmed beef that is all raised on genetically modified corn and soy. So no, the Feed the World argument is not accurate or in the slightest.
And Russia, which is also taking part in Saturday's anti-GMO rally, has taken a harsh stance on the issue. Its parliament is now looking into a bill which, if passed, could see biotech producers punished as terrorists. There's also strong opposition in Europe, which turned away from GMO in the late 1990s. But the U.S., where almost 90% of food is genetically modified, is still trying to get its hands on the European market. Right now, most of the EU states have banned the crops, and all food must be labeled if it contains engineered products. EU rules also permit member nations to establish the so-called GMO-free zones, and the regulations have kept most of it out. But health and food advocate Robert Verkerk says Europe won't be able to keep this up for much longer in the face of American pressure.
In Europe, if you look at at human foodstuffs, there is a requirement to label them as GMOs if they contain more than 0.9%. In the United States of America, what's rather appalling is that the consumer does not have that informed choice because of the fact that mandatory labeling has not been introduced. And in the number of states where it has been attempted, Monsanto and other companies have been extremely aggressively involved in political campaigns. It's very difficult to look at an overarching regulatory system other than perhaps phytosanitary measures through the World Trade Organization. One of the difficulties is that essentially privately run organizations like the WTO are generally likely to be in favor of large corporate interests because that's what world trade is all about.
Our two hosts of Breaking the Set, Abby Martin, has been following Monsanto's operation for years. Here's a preview of her latest program where she takes a look at the company's records.
Starting with the Monsanto Protection Act, let's take a look back at the crooked company's lowlights. Last week, a very disturbing provision was slipped into the latest Senate budget bill. This small and conspicuous provision was coined the Monsanto Protection Act. Essentially, it deregulated genetically modified foods even more. further solidifying Monsanto's power over the food supply and their total immunity from prosecution. This guy epitomizes the revolving door. First, Taylor was a lawyer for Monsanto. Then he joined the FDA's deputy commissioner for foods. Then he went back to Monsanto and became its vice president for public policy. Yeah, I'm sure his FDA position didn't help open that door. But don't worry, he's now back in the FDA in the same cushy position as he was before, rubber stamping pro-Monsanto legislation.
Right, a look at some other stories making global headlines is coming your way right after this short break.
In his secret laboratory, Tim Kirby was able to build the world's most sophisticated robot, which unfortunately doesn't give a darn about anything. Tim's mission? To teach his creation why it should care about humans and world events. This is Why You Should Care. Watch only on RT.com.
Welcome to RT International and thank you for tuning in. With the recent credit upgrade, there seems to be light at the end of the tunnel for the struggling Greek economy. But so far, there's little change for the austerity-stricken Greek people. Unemployment remains the highest in Europe, with more than half the country's youth out of work. And some are now fleeing the cities in search of a better life, only to discover things aren't any brighter in the countryside, as Marina Kostrova reports.
They say desperate times call for desperate measures. And for many young Greeks, that was the case when they were forced to return to the countryside at the height of the economic crisis, looking for a cheaper and better quality of life. But high taxes, rampant unemployment and lack of resources have touched every single area in Greece, not just the cities, leaving many in a dead end.
I left the village 5 years ago. I tried to work in the city at various companies, but the quality of life there is not the same. I returned and tried to cultivate crops, but unfortunately exploitation of lands offers very little money. A young person cannot have a family and make ends meet like this.
Yannis lives in the village of Arvaniti. He travels back and forth to the city trying to make a living. He's one of the few left here. Most people you encounter are much older, like Georgios. Most of his children have also left.
Our village comprises 70 families, which is around 400 people. Half of the population left. Most of the people here are old. Young people have moved to the cities or abroad in search of a better life, and those who stay behind will end up looking for something better eventually.
The problem is that at the moment, very few know where to look for that something better. On the one hand, you have unemployment in the cities, and on the other, dying villages lacking resources. Locals have told me that the only school there is here has been closed since 2011, so we're heading there now to find out why it's been shut down and what alternatives the kids living here have. As we approach, I meet a former student who tells me that 100 students used to go here until it too succumbed to the economic crisis.
From the pupils you see here, not one stayed in the village. They went to the big cities because there's no work here. And the agricultural things we cultivate don't offer enough money to keep a family here.
There is a lack of money. The expenses and taxes people pay here are equal to those in the city, yet income is very low.
Even the head of the village has been out of work for over a year, and he doesn't believe that the situation will ever improve.
If young people do return here, they will still not be able to work, because cultivating the land is too expensive, therefore not advantageous.
The government insists the country will return to growth this year, but very few believe their optimistic forecasts anymore.
We'll see what happens. We're trying and waiting for something better. If it comes, good. If not, then we'll stay as we are. What can we do?
Marina Kostrova reporting for RT from Greece.
Another struggling European economy, Italy, is going to new lengths to boost its economy. The government is set to include revenues from drug trafficking, prostitution, and smuggling into its GDP numbers. Find out how it all adds up on our website. Also online, lawmakers in the U.S. state of Tennessee vote in favor of bringing back the electric chair to avoid mishaps with lethal injection. Get to the bottom of that at RT.com.
Right from the scene. First-rate news and eye-gripping pictures. On our reporters' Twitter and Instagram. To be in the know, follow us online.
The British government's being accused of exaggerating the country's energy potential after a report revealed there's no point fracking for shale gas in southern England. The findings did point to massive oil reserves there, but stress they will be hard to recover. It's more bad news for the UK economy, which is rapidly running out of fossil fuels. A recent study suggests London should urgently turn to alternative energy or become fully dependent on imports, as Polly Boyko reports.
According to the Global Sustainability Institute, you can set your watch to it. In just over 5 years' time, Britain will have run out of oil, coal and gas. A new report shows that if it consumes energy at the rate it did in 2010, well, the UK has 5.2 years of oil, 4.5 years of coal and just 3 years of gas left. And that's if Scotland doesn't vote to leave the Union later this year, taking its North Sea oil with it.
Italy has just over 1 year of oil and less than a year of gas and coal reserves, while France, which relies predominantly on nuclear energy, has less than a year's reserves of oil, gas and coal. Elsewhere in the world, Kuwait has a stash of over 700 years of black gold. While Qatar boasts over a millennium, Norway has almost 500 years, and Russia has just over a century's worth of natural gas. One of the report's conclusions is that Europe needs to develop renewable energy, such as wind and solar power.
Well, the energy maps come less than a month after the UK's Committee on National Security said that the government's energy plans weren't robust enough. One thing that the news is likely to fuel is Westminster's dash for shale gas. Ministers are hoping that hydraulic fracturing will lead to greater energy independence. But that's not likely to placate environmentalists who claim that the process is dangerous. Polly Boyko, RT, London.
We spoke with the author of the report, Dr. Aled Jones from the UK's Anglia Ruskin University. He believes Europe is headed for an energy crisis.
The likelihood is gas prices in Europe will increase dramatically, certainly in the short term, until alternative supplies can be found. And then where those alternative supplies come from, there's a big question about whether the infrastructure is in place to be able to supply those. So what we're likely to see is an increased price of gas in Europe, and therefore some very serious situations around electricity generation, heating, and all the other things that we use gas for in Europe. So we will see significant impacts on our electricity market and our heating markets.
And here's a look at some other news stories from across the world. America has cut millions of dollars in military aid to Thailand after the army ousted the government in a coup. Over 100 top politicians, including the former prime minister, have been detained. Thailand is now governed by 6 senior army officers. Protests in the capital against the new rule have been dispersed. Clashes in Egypt have killed 2 people ahead of Monday's presidential elections. Dozens were injured in violence between Islamists and their opponents during a Muslim Brotherhood rally. The country has been in turmoil since President Morsi was ousted by the military last summer. And flooding in China has killed 8 people. Heavy rains have been battering the country for the past 4 days. The downpour has caused landslides and traffic interruptions. Schools in parts of the country are closed, with forecasters saying the weather isn't going to improve in the coming days. Boom Bust is next with Erin Aid here on RT International. But if you're watching from the UK, it's over to George Galloway for Sputnik.